Welcome. Excited to bring stakeholders from across the cannabis community to talk a little bit about how these new hemp laws are going to impact patients and what states can do to help mitigate some of that harm. And so today, Americans for Safe Access released a briefing for state policymakers, governors, state regulators, advocates, really looking at both how we got here, what the future is going to look like, and some tools that states can utilize to address this issue. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this report, and then we're going to hear from stakeholders about their experience that their communities are having post the hemp regulation announcement, and bring their point of view and most importantly, bring this policy issue back to patients. Because I think there's been a lot of talk about what this means for businesses, what this means for industry, and not enough about the individuals who are going to be most affected by this policy. I just want to say thank you so much to our members, sponsors, who are there to help us be able to turn these reports around pretty quickly. And also, we had some great volunteers step up and really help with editing, but also putting the policy components together. So Karen, Nikki, Amy, Brandy, Dr. Fry, Cody, thank you so much for your time. It was a very busy end of year, so I'm happy we could get this out as quickly as we did.
And I'm going to interrupt. Steph deserves to be mentioned in there as well. Thank you for your hard work preparing this and getting this out there and including this webinar. You can go on.
Thank you. Thank you. So, part of why we created this is again, I said that there wasn't a lot of talk about patients, but we wanted to make sure that everyone isn't just focused on federal changes, and I'll talk a little bit in a minute about why that is a challenge to put all of our eggs in that basket, but also to talk a little bit about how we got here and why patients were depending on the hemp market, even in states with medical cannabis programs. So, as we start looking at this countdown to November 11th, I want to make sure that states are doing everything that they can to accommodate these patients, knowing that this is going to fall on their foot on their front door one way or another, whether it's public health issues of driving more patients into illicit markets or unregulated markets. So that's sort of what's behind the report. And we really took the time to kind of create this, make a resource that uh, elected officials can use over time. Really, did a deep dive into the hemp laws. Really looking at the patient community, and also looking at the big picture about the ultimate goal of medical cannabis advocates, which is creating a national medical cannabis program. People are looking at what they can do, or I think a lot of people feel like, on one hand, maybe a chapter was closed and they're never going to have to deal with intoxicating hemp again. Others feel like, there was some hope in President Trump's executive order. The importance here is that if you're looking at the patient community, we all have to step up and make sure that those vulnerable patients have somewhere to go. And the answer can't be that businesses were acting badly. That is not going to stop someone's seizures. I mean, if it did, you know, uh, we wouldn't need to be here at all.
Hmm.
And so, what will happen this year is that access is going to change for patients, no matter what happens, right? And without states intervening, some of the most vulnerable citizens of the state are going to be left without a therapeutic option, or maybe making choices that they don't want to or aren't safe to make sure that they have access to those products. And so in the report, I'm not going to go through all of this. I just want you guys to know that this is here. There's really a deep analysis into the actual legislation, what it does and doesn't do. Really looked at some of the timelines. November 11th is our sort of countdown date of when these hemp laws take effect. I think a lot of people were saying that they were totally surprised by this, but this has been a debate that's been going on since 2018, right? Since the hemp was first made legal. DEA had a firm sort of view that all these cannabinoids were illegal. We saw legislators try to fix this over time. And then, if we weren't all confused enough, then in December, there was an executive order by President Trump that, really sounded great. And if you just saw the headlines, you would think that there was no need for Americans for safe access anymore, which, that would be great. But the executive order, it actually just told a bunch of people to do things, right? So it told the Department of Justice to move forward with the existing rescheduling petition. It told, Trump's deputy chief of staff to work with Congress to expand access to these products. And so he recognized that there was a problem with that legislation, but he couldn't intervene and change it himself. So he had to basically call on Congress to do that. And then he also called on the Department of Health to do some exciting things if they have the funding to do it. So lots more to do there. But I think one of the challenges, especially when we look at, what a lot of people, a lot of patients who were worried about HR 5371 was this idea that, this item for him to fix, for Congress to fix the full spectrum CBD products is going to be met by a very unhappy legislature. I mean, there's quite a big backlash to this executive order from Trump. And so we saw, key members of the oversight committees that would need to pass this legislation, really wrote some of the content was really out there, but definitely not in favor of cannabis overall. And a lot of these individuals led the fight to close the loophole. And so the other thing that we're starting to see is this idea that nobody needs to do anything because Schedule 3 is going to solve everything for everyone, everywhere. And, I just want to bring people back to reality, which is, Schedule 3 is a change in an acceptance of currently accepted medical use, which is something patients have been fighting for a long time. But it doesn't actually legalize medical cannabis. It doesn't improve the programs, right? It doesn't restore federal rights. And so in the report, we do a deep dive into really what Schedule 3 looks like. And we're really hoping that policymakers don't brush us off. And, the reality is that the entire framework of the state cannabis programs are still going to be illegal. Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, right? They're acting outside of the DEA's system for regulating scheduled substances. So, this is not going to be it's a step forward, but it's not a solution. And so again, the executive order was exciting, right? It's always great to hear people in DC recognizing that cannabis has medicine, but there's nothing in that executive order that is going to stop patients from losing access, right? There's maybe some opportunities to define things a little bit differently, but ultimately, there are tens of millions of people who are going to find out that their medicine was illegal. And so, kind of looking at how we got here, this is sort of Cody's wheelhouse a little bit, but this is one plant. So we just kind of talk a little bit about the background. Medical cannabis and the fight for cannabis access is not the only fight that's been happening for access to this plant. There's a hemp movement that was moving and pushing, access to hemp for textiles and other markets, foodstuffs for a long time that had nothing to do with cannabinoids, right? And so they're another stakeholder in this conversation. Before the 2018 law, there was a sort of pilot version in 2014. And part of that was meeting the needs of the hemp farmers who wanted to see foodstuffs and textiles. But also there was this huge demand for CBD products, right? There was a Sanjay Gupta special that really woke the world up. to CBD. And, there was this huge demand. There were some CBD laws, but none of them actually created access. And so, the many patients went to the only market available. And for 5 years, was it 5 years or 7 years? We were waiting for 5 years, waiting for the FDA to step up and regulate these products. They held working groups. ASA testified at those hearings. We thought we were going to see some type of regulation of this market. And after 5 years, they came out and said that actually they weren't able to regulate this market. And so that was, 2 years ago, and there's been sort of a growing backlash, right? If FDA wasn't going to step in, we started seeing these intoxicating hemp markets. The map for hemp regulations look a lot like our map for medical cannabis, right? All over the place. And then we started seeing, members of Congress sort of taking the state fight, back to Congress to try to close the loophole. And so this language was first introduced in a version of the Farm Bill that didn't pass. But some of the opponents of cannabis and hemp brought this into the appropriations process. And then as they were sort of negotiating this, there was a letter from 39 attorney generals that really kind of sealed the fate, right, of whether or not this hemp language was going to end up in the appropriations bill. There's a lot of and different ideas about what is a medical cannabis patient. From the moment that the first law passed in 1996, there have been jokes about who is a medical cannabis patient. It's really frustrating as a patient for people to always put my medicine in air quotes. So don't do that when you're talking to patients. But in the report, we're really breaking down like who are these patients, right? And chances are many people in your life, whether you know it or not, are utilizing cannabinoid medicines. We really look at pain, what is keeping patients from having access in the state programs, right? So looking at all of the barriers that it takes for a patient to get access and the role that that has in actually sending patients to the hemp market in the first place. Looking at veterans, active military, who are often, shut out of the state programs. And we do each of these pictures, there's actually a patient story in this report. So you can hear from patients directly of how this is affecting their lives. And so we look at aging populations, rare diseases, rheumatic and chronic conditions, all conditions that we're not seeing pharmaceutical solutions for. And so again, those are some of our most vulnerable patients. And, I think medical cannabis patients have been like a hot potato, right, sent between states and federal government for a long time. And the truth is everybody has a role. And while states have been, a part of this laboratory of democracy for years, they've played an important role in demonstrating the potential of medical cannabis. But that fight isn't over yet. The federal government isn't stepping up just yet. And, this whole experiment started because the federal government shut down actually a federal program. And so patients went to the states for access, well, first protection and then access. And, without that sort of framework, patients are on their own trying to figure out, product safety concerns of cannabis products. We saw within the adult use market, all of these issues that really locked patients out of programs that they fought so hard to pass. And so the report kind of goes into detail, sort of a perspective that people haven't seen. And then we also, are looking at this moment in time with, what we're seeing with the hemp laws, with the sort of interaction between federal and state policies, and really looking ahead to see, what that means for a national medical cannabis program. And so we do just sort of a bit of a dive into what that transition would look like. reminding people why we need federal legislation, all of the issues that are facing patients, what that program and structure would look like. Um, you know, we're actually looking at introducing this legislation this year, so we really want to be working with states to see this as a bridge, right? Not an either or, but forward. And this isn't some pie in the sky policy idea that Americans for Safe Access just came up with. This is something we've been working on for almost 24 years now. And this is what we see in most of the 60 countries that have medical cannabis laws. And this is, this model of having a new regulatory agency and even a new schedule is actually something that's being discussed on Capitol Hill. This isn't some pie in the sky notion. And so at the base of this, besides, making a program that works, we have to remember that patients still don't have federal rights, right? We are not protected by the American Disabilities Act. We're not protected by the Fair Housing Act. We can't own guns, right? So we are in every way not a part of our country. And the report includes a bunch of resources. Also talk a little bit of, really dive into the role of states as laboratories of democracy. Talk about a report that we're doing that actually is coming out in less than a month. That is a report card of all of the states, how they're doing, but really dives into what that transition would look like. And, we're not talking about starting from scratch. Do you like my Etch-a-Sketch image? I'm pretty proud of it. So, but we're going to build on this work, 30 years of work that patients, advocates, and policymakers have put into solving some of these issues of bringing a complex botanical to patients. And then finally, in the report, we actually give state legislators and governors some language that they can actually introduce to address this issue. And part of it includes, creating incentives for these products to be introduced into the currently regulated market, right? Actually, giving business incentives includes ways that they can actually bring products from the hemp market into the regulated market. But I think most importantly, we talk about making sure that the program is serving patients, right? There's actually looking at some of the issues that we've been trying to correct for years. And so, our hope is that we're going to insert patients back into this dialogue, but also, really point to specific measures that states can take to address these issues, right? That it isn't something that they're just like can put their hands up in the air. I think we all have to take a little bit of responsibility, especially when we're so close, right, to our ultimate goal of creating a national medical cannabis program. So let's not have a big public health crisis before we get there. And the report also just includes a lot of resources for people who want to do deeper dives into advocacy, into educating the public about patients. We have resources for patients to make sure that they are safe during this transition, that they're not, having issues when traveling, or if they do have to turn to other markets for their cannabis products, help with them guiding it. And then, of course, actions that people can take to get this report to their governors and state representatives. So, with that in mind, I would love to actually turn this conversation to our stakeholders we have here, and I want to start with you, Shanitha. Shanitha Lewis is actually a board member of Americans for Safe Access. She is a veteran, a medical cannabis patient, and a tireless, amazing advocate. So, welcome, Shanitha, and we're excited to hear your perspective and how this is impacting the veteran community.
Thank you so much, Steph, and thank you to ASA for having me here today to represent veterans and to be able to support veterans in this fight. So I'm just going to quickly go over a statement that I've put together. So, millions of American veterans rely on cannabis and cannabinoid-based therapies to manage chronic pain, PTSD, TBI, sleep disorders, and other service-related conditions. These are not fringe uses, they are daily medical realities for people who have served this country. And yet, despite this growing scientific consensus and despite recent federal acknowledgement that cannabis has accepted medical use, veterans still remain systematically denied safe, affordable, and medically supervised access to these treatments. Federal law continues to prohibit the Veterans Health Administration providers from recommending or assisting with medical cannabis. Of course, active duty service members remain subject to zero tolerance policies that you've mentioned that criminalize all cannabinoid use, including federally legal hemp-derived products. At the very same time, veterans are routinely prescribed opioids and psychiatric medications with well-documented risk, including dependency, overdose, and sadly, increased suicide risk. The contradiction is becoming more dangerous. New federal hemp restrictions scheduled to take effect in November will further serve to destabilize access for veterans and other medically vulnerable patients who currently rely on hemp-derived full-spectrum cannabinoid products as their primary, or in many cases, their only form of treatment. Without deliberate state and/or congressional intervention, these changes will abruptly remove full-spectrum cannabinoid medicines from lawful commerce, cutting off care for patients who depend on them every single day to function, to sleep, to eat, to work, and in many cases, to survive. Many veterans did not turn to the hemp marketplace simply by choice. They turned to it because state medical cannabis programs were inaccessible, unaffordable, geographically out of reach, or stripped of the non-intoxicating and whole plant formulations that they require. The consequences of inaction are not abstract. 1 in 3 veterans lives with chronic pain. Suicide remains the second leading cause of death among veterans under the age of 45, with more than 17, which is the latest number. If you include opioid overdose, it is 44 veterans dying every day by suicide.
Okay.
Research shows that veterans receiving the highest doses of opioid painkillers are more than twice as likely to die by suicide compared to those receiving lower doses. At the same time, cannabis use has been associated with reduced opioid reliance, improved system management, improved quality of life. So forcing veterans to lose access to cannabinoid medicines risks worsening pain, destabilizing mental health, increasing opioid exposure, and pushing patients towards unsafe pharmaceutical regimens, unregulated markets, or illicit sources. While federal agencies remain constrained by outdated statutes and fragmented policy, the states are not powerless. They remain the primary line of defense for veterans and other medically vulnerable populations whose access to care is now at risk. States can act now by enacting emergency or transitional medical access legislation that preserves continuity of care for patients displaced from the hemp market. They can establish temporary authorization pathways, clear transition periods that prevent sudden and dangerous disruption. States can strengthen and modernize their medical cannabis programs by restoring access to non-intoxicating and whole plant formulations, expanding delivery and rural access, and reducing or eliminating registration fees that disproportionately burden veterans, people with disabilities, and low-income patients. States can also create veterans-specific medical cannabis protections that operate independently of the federal VA system, including fee waivers, explicit anti-discrimination protections, and funding for clinician education on cannabis for PTSD, pain, sleep disorders. Regulators can act immediately through executive authority by issuing emergency health rules, providing enforcement discretion, convening interagency task force, and coordinating health, agriculture, and veterans agencies while permanent solutions are debated. Legislatures can further protect patients by codifying employment, housing, and civil protections so veterans are never forced to choose between their health their benefits, their housing, or their livelihoods. As Steph mentioned, and I love this, how she states it, the states have served as the laboratories of democracy for medical cannabis. They've built patient registries, safety standards, testing systems, clinical access pathways. They generated real-world evidence that ultimately compelled federal agencies to recognize cannabis as having accepted medical use. Now, as federal hemp policy shifts without a patient-centered access strategy in place, states once again hold both the responsibility and the tools to prevent a foreseeable public health crisis. Veterans fought for this country. They should not be collateral damage of regulatory change, and they should not be forced to sacrifice effective medical care because federal policy has failed to keep pace with medical reality. Thank you.
Amen.
Wow.
I
Thank you,
agree.
Shanita. That was really powerful.
Thank you.
Sorry, gotta get my berries a little bit. Someone who has a pretty similar experience. Sasha, it's our next speaker, has been working with cannabinoid patients for quite some time, and has really become a bridge to, connecting patients with information about these medicines, about where to find safe products, tested products, and bridging that experience with their medical professionals. So, Sasha, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to hearing sort of how your community is grappling with this latest in our struggles for access.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steph, for just giving us this space, just like Shanita said, and always bringing the conversation back to the patient. That's something that you always do so wonderfully, and that's just what's needed the most right now. And I will say, I keep noticing my screen is like freezing. So if at any point you can't hear me, Cody, I'm going to rely on you. Just shout at me. Just tell me to turn off my camera so you can still actually hear me. Okay. Yes, but I'm here today to talk about the patients who will be the most impacted. And those patients are going to be your everyday hemp consumers who've been utilizing commercially available products that have been available for them to purchase, whether that be online or in a natural food store, for more than a decade now. And I think that this might be the biggest reality check of all, that the language that was slipped in the Farm Bill in the final hour in November eradicates nearly every quality CBD from hemp on the market because of the naturally found allowable non-intoxicating levels of THC that are in these products. And this is affecting patients who might be using this as a first line of treatment or therapy before trying pharmaceuticals that have potential damaging side effects. But probably more often, it's affecting those patients that have exhausted all other conventional medicines and therapies, whether that be for epilepsy or Parkinson's disease and everything in between. These are individuals, both pediatric and adult, who've gone from palliative care in hospice to a quality of life at home, at school, at work. And Realm of Caring speaks from experience in guiding over 100,000 individuals globally for over the last 13 years that we've been operating as a nonprofit. And unfortunately, we've seen this happen in various states who changed their THC thresholds for CBD. And then not everybody has that opportunity to just pick up and move to a different state. But given these new guidelines, even that won't be an option for people. So when access disappears overnight, patients, they don't stop needing care, they just lose their safest option. And when that happens, people don't get healthier, they get pushed into riskier choices, they get pushed back to medications that have already failed them, or they get pushed into silence and begin suffering alone. And so this isn't about expanding access here, it's about preserving what we have. And patients who have played by the rules for more than a decade should not be punished by language that ignores biology, ignores science, and ignores that lived experience. And we have the opportunity right now to fix this, to protect public health, uphold patient dignity, almost the most important of all, and ensure that no family is forced backward after finding relief. So just to sort of end my statement by answering that very good question of who are the patients that will be most impacted, the patients that are most impacted are not necessarily going to be those new or experimental users. They're the children with seizure disorders. They're seniors who are managing neurodegenerative diseases. Just as you heard from Shanita, veterans coping with various debilitating conditions, including life-threatening ones. and individuals with chronic pain, autoimmune conditions, anxiety who are relying on these non-intoxicating hemp products to function, just function from day to day. And these are families who turned to hemp-derived CBD because it was accessible and it was affordable and it allowed them to maintain clarity, independence, but most importantly, it allowed them to maintain a quality of life.
Sasha, I just want to say thank you so much. And I also just want to point out to folks that Sasha and Realm of Caring is actually working with HHS to define some of these conditions. You can actually participate in a major research study that they're doing. And Sasha, I know if you want to send me a slide, I'll add it to the slideshow that I send out with this. So
Yeah,
very
and I
important
can
work.
also just say like a little like blip about that if you'd like, because so we partner with Johns Hopkins, who received a NIDA grant, and it's to collect information on people before they commence their cannabis use and then understanding that use over time. So we now have patients who've been in a 12-month survey, taking surveys every couple of months to understand what conditions, what commercially available products they're using, and then what are the health outcomes that they're experiencing as a result. And it's of all cannabinoid products, not just high THC or high CBD, but any formulation or combination. So that way we can then dive deeper into those specific condition types and understand what dosing looks like for specific treatments, given what medications people are taking and what other co-occurring conditions that they might have. So thanks
Yeah.
for that, Steph.
Of course, such
Yeah.
important work, and we're ASA is actually putting out a series to try to get more patients to participate in research, understand it's their patriotic duty that we've been fighting for research, so now we have to participate in it. So thank you, Sasha. And now I want to turn to Dr. Vinegar, who I know has been seeing patients and has been using cannabinoid medicines as a tool in your medical toolbox. I'd love to hear from you sort of how the medical community is reacting to this news and what are some of your hopes and fears.
Thank you, Steph, for this opportunity and to talk with so many important people in the space of cannabis. And the truth is that hemp is really a chemotype 3 CBD dominant cannabis product. It's the same thing. And I know that you discussed that in the work that you're sending out. It's really just one plant. But when seeing patients and taking care of them, the cost of buying that CBD dominant cannabis in a dispensary, even if you're lucky enough that your state has a medical cannabis program, is much, much higher. And that's why a lot of patients had turned to the hemp market. I mean, to get that full spectrum CBD product, which is essentially the same as CBD dominant cannabis that dispensaries are selling, but it was at a more reasonable price. And then additionally, now what we're finding, and I've seen in the state where I practice, and other states have been saying the same thing, any of the states that have sort of enacted that adult use for cannabis are now catering to that market and really kind of pushing out and no longer carrying some of these, which is technically chemotype 3 CBD dominant cannabis products, and spending more time on, higher and higher percentages of THC found in cannabis products. So that's another issue. So it's the cost and it's the availability of these products. So a lot of patients turn to the hemp markets for their medications. And there are some really reputable hemp companies. I help patients find them. They provide certificates of analysis showing purity and potency, showing any contaminations and stuff. But unfortunately, in general, when the hemp law was passed, there's that lack of regulation in that market, unlike the requirements that are very stringent on the state level for the medical cannabis market. They have allowed some bad actors to sort of skirt, getting licenses for cannabis and such, and creating dangerous and intoxicating hemp products. And that market has sort of put us into this situation. So it's what everybody's been saying up until this point. As a physician, of course, we want more regulation. We want to see more safety and standardization for the patients. But these potential new laws that are trying to correct this loophole that we've been talking about for a long, long time is now going to take away the medical hemp that many patients desperately need and depend on. So it is important to speak with legislators, even on the state level, and let them know that having a reliable hemp market or having reasonably priced CBD dominant products within the medical cannabis markets and programs, if you happen to have that in your state, are really critical. So patients are able to maintain the use of their medicine. And, I have seen the gamut of patients from veterans, children, hospice patients, where they just want to spend more lucid time with their family at the end as opposed to, relying so heavily on opiates. And it's really critical. I get referrals from physicians all the time. And I don't think a lot of people really understand what this means because, of course, these intoxicating hemp products, we know as physicians, we've talked about it a lot, are potentially dangerous, just in even the way that they make them. But we're losing sight of this market being really important for patients, and it's something that we have to work on. So thank you, Steph, for continuing to talk about it. I think a lot of people don't understand, even patients don't understand because, they say, oh, the executive order is going to take care of everything. And even legislators don't understand. And, I sit on the the medical cannabis public health advisory committee for the state. And even a lot of people on the committee are not really sure what's going on. So it's important to get the word out and let people know that while we want more regulations and we need to close the loophole from dangerous, intoxicating hemp products, it still is a lifeline for a lot of patients that can't afford it and don't even find these products anymore in their state programs.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vinegar, for your insight, but also, being a voice for patient access. Always appreciate your advocacy and your perspective. And I want to bring Cody Peterson into this conversation, who is one of my advisors when it comes to understanding the medical benefits of cannabis at the chemical level. But Cody, as a pharmacist, also works directly with patients to find treatment. So I wanted to hand it over to you, Cody, and see sort of how the pharmacists and how the patients that you've been seeing are handling this news.
Appreciate it. And great work, everyone. I think you've covered a lot of bases. I'm going to try to synthesize a lot of what we did, but Steph, keep me honest if I miss something or there's something important afterwards. Don't hesitate to prompt me, and I'd be happy to chat about it. Going back to what Lee had said, and I want to be clear. These cannabinoids, the active ingredient or one of many active ingredients, but the primary one in cannabis plants don't occur in a vacuum. They're not made as THC only or as CBD only. In fact, they're commonly made even in hemp plants in ratios that exceed the federal limit as is at the 0.3%, the old limit. That is very common. In fact, the same plant which may be hemp is less than 0.3% THC in, say, Pennsylvania. If you bring it to Florida, it's now not, and it's producing even more THC. So this is not a straightforward thing that we're dealing with when we're dealing with botanical plants. So the rigidity of point 0.3 was already kind of tight as far as this plant's genetics and its capabilities are concerned. And now the change that occurred during the continuing resolution that changed the maximum per package THC limit to zero point 0.4 milligrams is frankly unattainable without excessive processing and really stripping the plant of what we think it is, which is a beautiful plant medicine. And instead, you're forcing people to sort of separate all of it out and take out, frankly, one of the more powerful molecules in the plant, which is THC. Now, just because THC is psychotropic, it can change the way we think and feel at large doses, does not mean that the dose is delivered by to the average patient taking a typical dose of a full spectrum product is. So that's really where we're trying to focus is we understand that the market wants to limit and restrict access to synthetic cannabinoids, to really marijuana being sold in avenues that are not taxed in the way that the state wants. And we all have our own opinions about how that should actually be, but that's not really the issue at hand here. The issue at hand is patients are about to lose access to the non-intoxicating products that they've been taking, stabilized on, and it's helping them, it's helping veterans with their depression. It's helping children with seizures. It's helping adults stay off opioids and deal with their chronic pain every day. And there's issue after issue after issue that we had a patchwork that was not perfect, but was kind of working for millions and millions of medical cannabis patients around the country. And just because they got their product from hemp doesn't mean they're not a medical cannabis patient. And I really love that. Steph focused on that, and then Sasha had mentioned really what they're doing at I'm sorry, Johns Hopkins, the prestigious institution she mentioned, in their study is they're kind of figuring out that cannabis patient. What is a cannabis patient? How are they experiencing adding this new medicine and going forward, and trying to instead put a definition on somebody who uses cannabis or a cannabis user, which is already, there's a brand new study, go check it out. Ruth Fisher just tried to address this in the literature. But aside from that, what does the journey of a patient look like? And I think that's so important. How does someone become a medical cannabis patient? And oftentimes it's in tremendous need after trying all of the traditional therapies and with immense, physical or emotional or financial stress on them, and they can find this plant and it can help them immensely. And that's so many people's experience, and we're about to restrict that a lot. So ASA, in an effort to put this together and under Steph's amazing leadership, decided that, okay, how can we now find a different way to empower this type of behavior? And that is to try to give states an incentive to produce these medicines, which are definitely getting pushed out of the legal market. And I want to give you a personal anecdote here. I started treating a 2-year-old boy with some pretty complex epilepsy that was refractory to traditional pharmaceuticals. It took us a while. We started on a CBD dominant product, a type 3 product that Dr. Vineker had mentioned. So this is a hemp-like product in a marijuana dispensary in California. It started to work. It was helping. Didn't get us all the way where we needed, so we had to go looking for an additional cannabinoid, a CBG. Well, that's not sold in most of California, certainly not without THC, and I got a little guy on our hands. So we're not a lot of THC is really what I should say there. A 1-to-1 THC CBG is pretty common, but you're not finding CBG dominant products in a marijuana dispensary. They're not focused on it. It's not a volume mover. And, it's a real challenge. So this little boy goes to the hemp market. He's going to the marijuana market in California to get his CBD product. He becomes seizure free. He comes off the pharmaceuticals. He's doing amazing. The marijuana company in California that had been making this type 3 product stopped, right? And you know what they did? They actually stopped to go to the hemp market. So they decided the burden was too great and the market was not good. So they actually moved over to the hemp industry. And so then my patient follows into the hemp industry. And now here we are having that access cut off. The product that he was already in the marijuana dispensary. We have proof of concept here that, hey, they don't really prioritize this type of product. And now this young man, he's almost 5 now. We got to shuffle it up again. And I don't know what the implications are going to be. I don't know if the producers that are currently selling their product are going to be able to do it, or if California is going to have products that can match this on the dispensary shelf or the average dispensary shelf anyway. And so there's just a lot of question marks going forward. Another more personal, closer to home example is my English Bulldog had a knee replacement 6 or 7 years ago. She's been on the same CBD product from the same manufacturer in Oregon. It works great for her. She's a happy-go-lucky, almost 10-year-old bulldog. And now all of a sudden, like, couldn't we switch? Of course, I have the wherewithal and the resources, but I'm lucky. I'm not the average patient. My bulldog's not the average patient, and he doesn't have the average owner in this regard. But there are so many animals, children, elderly individuals, people on their deathbed even, that can benefit from this, that we're about to give the squeeze, and we need to empower the state programs to hit the release valve. So that is what this briefer is for, and that's what this model legislation is put together. And I think that if you open up this document that really Steph drove putting together, you are going to find so much value and context around what's going on right now. How can we push back? What's real about the Schedule 3 and what's not? And so check it out.
Thank you, Cody. I'm going to try to turn my video on, but if I freeze, I'm going to turn it off and probably have to sign back in. So again, I'm having a Verizon issue. Hi, everyone. I'm going to put out a couple questions from that. I just want to say thank you all so much for joining me today, but also being just amazing advisors. You guys have all been key in shaping both the policy at Americans for Safe Access, but making sure that we are taking into account all stakeholders as we move forward. Because, of course, without medical professionals, patients won't have access. Without pharmacists, we won't understand our access. And without patient advocates, we would be up to the whims of Congress. So thank you all so much for all that you do every day for patients. And so I have one question I have is, and I think Lee or Sasha or both of you can answer this, which is what advice would you give to a caregiver or a friend of someone who has been using products from the hemp market who may not understand everything that's happening as far as preparing for this transition?
Well, certainly if they could afford to stock up on some of the products at this point, and hopefully they're, using a hemp provider. And I usually give several lists to patients that we know are doing the testing and the analysis and the batch tracking so that they know there's no contamination and things like that. And try to stock up. And then also, speak with their customer service, see how they're preparing for this. Most of the companies are pretty savvy. The really good players that have been in the business for a long time and are, treat hemp like medical cannabis with, attempts at standardization, safety, and all of those things, and see what they're doing and see if there's especially a company that's helping you, see if there's a way you can collaborate in your state if they're doing it statewide or nationally. I mean, that's one of the other beauties of the hemp market is you don't have to have it in your state, which you are bound by when you're a medical cannabis patient, and you can get it across state lines if you know a reputable company. And so that's one of the good parts about it. And that's one of the dangers of losing it, because I would say the majority of recommendations that I make for patients are all over the country, helping them pick out really good hemp actors and hemp companies all over the country. And locally, there aren't really a lot. I mean, there was one good company that was closed down by neighbors not far from me because they couldn't stand the smell, which, shows you it's exactly cannabis is cannabis. It has the same smell. The terpenes create those smells. And, hemp smells the same way. And I can't believe some of the local legislatures.
No, thank you for that. And Cody, before I forget, before we get off, I want to have you address some of the issues around stockpiling, especially products that have acids. But let me give Sasha a chance to answer that question first, and then I'll go to you about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll let Cody answer the stockpiling and the degrading of cannabinoid portion of that. But also, I think that it's a great to prepare for the doomsday, but I would also argue that there's still time to have your voice be heard right now. And if you're a patient and you're benefiting, or you're a caregiver and you're noticing who you're caring for is benefiting, or you have a neighbor or a friend or a family member who's benefiting, you need to let that story be heard and call your state leaders, let them know how this state is serving your needs right now, and what's at risk if this is taken away. I promise you that they're hearing the bad stories over the good stories, and because that's why we're in this predicament, is because they're hearing about the synthetically derived Delta 8 product that caused issues. They're not hearing about the quality CBD, full spectrum CBD product from a very reputable company that is safe and non-intoxicating, that they've been using for whatever your ailment is for a long time. And that is going to be the thing that really, hopefully, changes the trajectory of the path that we're on, is just letting them be heard. So call your state leadership, email them, whatever it takes, but bug the heck out of them, because that's what is needed right now.
And I know Cody is going to talk as a pharmacist. He knows better about how the products maintain. But I always tell my patients to keep all their products in the refrigerator anyway, just to maintain some of the freshness and things like that. But Cody can answer how long they can. I know pharmaceuticals will say the expiration date is beyond this date and sell more products that isn't always accurate. But Cody can answer whether hemp products and full spectrum cannabinoids go by expiry.
Send this one question to her about veterans real quick before she has to jump off. The question for veterans is about the legislation that that was in the Veterans Appropriations Bill that was pulled out, even though we passed it in both the Senate and House this year. And the question is, do you think that that's an indication of a veteran's role in this fight? Does Congress not care, or is there, does that mean that veterans shouldn't be advocating, or does that mean that they should be advocating even more? I think someone set you up with that question, but
yeah, absolutely, they should be advocating even more. It is, to state it bluntly, an insult to veterans that they pulled that wording out after it had passed. It was nonsensical, and it was cruel. Veterans need, veteran patients need this medication. It's life-saving, and that's not a misnomer. It's life-saving for some veterans. And I would just echo that veterans need, we have a strong voice. That's why we chose the path in life that we chose. We have a strong voice and a strong wherewithal, and we need to use that. We need to speak to the legislators on the Veterans Affairs Committee. You need to reach out to your state and federal lawmakers and make your voice heard, and make them honor the service that you gave to this country. To state again, it's an insult. So yeah.
Oh, thank you for that, Shanita, and thank you for your service to this country, and for your continued service to veterans and other patients.
Thank you for
so when you need to hop off, I just wanted to make sure you didn't feel like you had to exit without anyway. But
thank you, Steph.
Of course. I think to Sasha's point, in a lot of the state, there've been almost every state has tried to pass some type of regulations around hemp, right? And a lot of the companies that have said regulate us are the ones who have sued the states to overturn them in many cases, which is frustrating. But I know that a lot of patients that tried to participate in those conversations um, were really insulted by policymakers because there were, because patients were used as a pawn, in front of intoxicating companies often. And so when a state legislator met a real patient or actually met a patient, they weren't sure if it was real or if it was just, if they were just a wolf in sheep's clothing. And so I just want to get people ready as you're advocating at the state level for these protections. Know that they've heard everything and they're really cynical about these products and about patients. And so, you're going to have to really fight to be heard and say, like, I am a patient. Bring in your letter from your doctor. Bring in some X-rays, right? Like, let them see that this is an issue that's impacting your life, and that just because you're being used as a pawn doesn't mean you are a pawn. So I just want to give people that sort of warning as you're utilizing this guide and reaching out to your state policymakers. Okay, Cody, tell us about the shelf life of some of these products, especially the acid forms.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the idea of stocking up is great. I think in reality, we need to be thoughtful around what it is we're stocking up on and not. I do think being prepared as this deadline comes near is really smart. I think that recognizing us having this conversation, us getting into the legislators' ear right now, and especially as we get closer to November, probably considering that extra shipment or whatever it is that we might. Now, I mean, in general, to Dr. Vineker's point, all pharmaceuticals have an expiration date, and every single pharmaceutical is going to have a different based on its contents. This is no different for cannabis oil, cannabis medicine, cannabis flower. It's going to be different across every product type. But to the point, there's an expiration date, kind of like a date you might see on something in the grocery store, and then there's like the true degradation or change in that product. And they don't always match. For pharmaceuticals, especially pilled pharmaceuticals, it tends to be many, many years beyond that. Now, cannabis is not necessarily made with the pharmaceutical rigor, et cetera, et cetera. But here's the scoop in general. When we look at cannabis products that are made with the neutral cannabinoids, THC or CBD, there are different ways to store something. The refrigerator is one that's going to be cool and some light, not maybe some not so much light. There's the on the shelf, in your kitchen, in the cabinet, no light, outside the cabinet with light. And then you could hypothetically keep it somewhere warm. I don't know why you would do that, but near the register or something like that. As you might imagine, cold and dark, cannabis and cannabinoids tend to preserve longer, and warm and bright, they tend to degrade faster. And so this goes for CBD and THC. And in general, we see somewhere naturally, even in something that's stored in a dark cabinet, about 10% degradation of the active component every year. That's an about. It can probably be significantly more if it is in that warmer and brighter spot. Of course, I can't tell you exactly the number, maybe 15 to 20% degradation. Now, is degradation dangerous? Thankfully, with cannabis, no. And so I'm not overly worried, but we do need to be thinking about the efficacy of our medicine and how our dose might change over time, particularly if we like really stocked up. You got 4 years in the closet or 5 years. Now, actually, the way compounding interest works, all of a sudden we do have a relatively degraded product. Now, acidic cannabinoids, the ones that are actually found in the cannabis flower or the ones that are preserved in certain products, that is different. And so the existing evidence, albeit relatively scant, suggests something to the effect of when stored in that cool, dark environment, it's a little they used a THCA product in the study that I'm referencing right now. In about just let's say a year and a half, the majority of the THCA, when kept at room temperature, had converted to THC. Okay, so this is medicine that's changing at a relatively rapid rate. Again, not dangerous for anyone who's had THC, they know that, but definitely a different experience. And so, if you're giving this to your dog, who can be very sensitive to THC, or to your child, then this is something that we want to be aware of. Most products on the market are not THCA because of that. And I want to caveat, because I know I'm going to find one of my friends. There are probably ways to package, preserve, or extract cannabis in this acidic form that preserve it. But in general, these are the rules, or the rules to go by. Lastly, at warm temperatures, the THC can degrade even faster, and again, in the refrigerator, sort of dark temperatures, it can take a while. But I believe the study that I recalled reading in preparation for this meeting, it was mostly converted when kept in the warm conditions, which again is sort of like uh, warm in the house, not necessarily hot, and near light. In just 3 months, the THCA had started to decarboxylate substantially to THC. So there is a lot of change that can happen. Most of it's not dangerous, but it can affect the efficacy of our medicine. One more caveat, particularly around really long storage, there is the ability of sometimes anyway, the things like the paint on the little dropper or the glass can have contaminants in it that can be heavy metals, not a lot, but over time these things can penetrate into our medicine as well. So I'm not against stocking up, but I do want to avoid like overt stockpiling. And so what I'd rather see is our state legislators listen to us and talk about and come up with some real reform. But I definitely understand that feeling. I mentioned my dog earlier, and she's not going to live that long, but I'm like, okay, how many bottles do I need? And I know
Right.
that patients are doing this math too, and it can be really stressful when your health depends on the answer. Plus, money. I mean, who wants to shell out up front for the future? Maybe will need, maybe won't need. It's really not fair to them. So I think for a lot of reasons
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Cody. And part of the legislation that we are asking, the emergency legislation or emergency rules that we're suggesting for states to adopt includes education about these products, because I think we're probably, as we get closer to November 11th, you're going to start seeing buy one, get 10 free sort of sales. You don't know how long those products were in a warehouse before you even got them. And so, let's make lasting change so you have continued access. And, stock, like definitely make sure that you're safe. But, that's not the answer. Stockpiling next year, I don't know, in your emergency bunker is never the answer. We want to try to make that lasting change. I want to thank our panelists so much for taking the time to be with us. I want to invite everyone who watches to take a look at the briefing. And we've also created an action page that includes sending this guide to your governor. It's already preloaded. You just have to know your address. I can't figure that out for you, but if you know just your zip code, I think even if you know your zip code, we have a preloaded letter for your governor that includes a link to the report. We have another action that will send it to your state representatives, whether that's senators, assembly, depending on the state you're in. Again, all you have to know is your address. And then we've also created some sample letter to the editors so that you can start educating your communities about this. I know people think that newspapers are not the most impactful art, but there's a lot of research that shows that people form their opinions from the editorial pages. So those letters to editor make a big difference, and it's a way for you to start educating your community. And if you have watched this and know about this report, know that this deadline is coming, also educate others. Share the report. It's free. Share it with everyone that you know, every cousin, aunt, grandparent that you know is using these products, and just make sure that one, they're going to be safe and know that this is coming, and two, that they join the fight for safe access. So thank you all, and hopefully we'll be seeing some solutions real soon. Thank you.